All right, we are live. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to week 2 of Education 512, the art and craft of teaching. Excellent job on your initial posts this last week, as well as your journals. Make sure you do add citations to both. If you are citing other people's thoughts and work, they deserve the credit. So just make sure you do that. I did not dock anybody points this week. This was the grace week, but I will dock a small fraction of points if you forget citations, and then 10% every day that you turn it in after Sunday. So it's really the only way that you will lose points, unless you just write something totally incoherent or, not a whole lot to it, no substance. So, but I'm usually pretty easygoing because I know how busy you all are, and my job is to get you ready to teach. So, all right, let's get started. Tonight, we are talking about differentiation. We are going to go back a little bit into week 1, talk a little bit about the brain. We're going to talk a little bit about different theories of instruction. But really, I want to spend most of our time tonight talking about differentiation. And I'm going to set you off to do a little research into the Structured Immersion Observation Protocol, or SIOP. All right, so here we go. Differentiating instruction, what does this mean? You're probably going to have an interview question very similar to this when you are interviewing for a teacher position. It might say, how do you differentiate your instruction to meet the needs of various groups of students? That's kind of going to be our focus question for tonight. So hopefully by the end of tonight's lecture, you'll have an understanding of what, obviously not a deep understanding of how to differentiate, but at least a broad understanding of what differentiation means and a couple of ways you can. So you are the decision maker in the classroom. You're going to take everything you learn and you're going to apply it to how you teach and assess students. So you're going to take brain research. We're going to talk about some theories of learning tonight. We're going to talk about how to understand our students and all the different ways they learn and all the different kinds of students we get in our classroom. Then you're going to take your knowledge of instruction and curriculum, which we'll talk about over the next 3 or 4 weeks, and then we'll talk about assessment. But you're going to apply all that knowledge into how you teach and how you assess your students and what you do with that information. You are the decision maker in the classroom. I've seen a lot of new teachers over the last 20 years in my career rely too heavily on curriculum or just other sources of information outside of their own brain, outside of their own expertise, to tell them how to teach. You have to take the information that you have at your disposal. So it could be assessment results, and you have to create lessons based on what you know about your kids, designed to meet their needs. That's going to change daily. It's going to change weekly. It's going to change monthly, yearly. You might have set up a whole year's worth of curriculum, and then the next year that doesn't work because you have different kids who need different things. And so that's really the core of what differentiation is all about. We have a job that's brand new every single year. Gone are the days of pulling the boxes out in September off your shelf, like when I was in elementary school, and we're going to teach about apples all September and read Johnny Appleseed. In October, we're going to teach about pumpkins. And it was the same every single year in that teacher's classroom. We've learned so much more about how kids learn in different ways and how to meet different kids' needs that it's overwhelming. I mean, it would be a lot easier if I could just teach to the middle and let the high kids get bored and let the low kids struggle and just teach to the middle like most whole class instruction works. But we have to meet every kid's needs. We have to start personalizing learning. That's a term that you're going to start hearing a lot more out there, which is personalized learning. How do we personalize learning for every individual learner? Special ed's been doing this for years, right? We have IEPs, individualized educational plans. What if, doesn't every student deserve an individualized educational plan? Not just students who are struggling, but what about kids who are advanced? Don't they need an individual plan to meet their needs? Absolutely. And so we're going to talk about how you can do that in a way that's not going to drive you crazy. So you're the reflective practitioner. You have to plan. What do I know about my students and my teaching context? You teach. How am I implementing instruction and addressing student needs? You reflect or assess. What have I learned about my teaching and my students? Remember, assessment, well, not remember, but assessment is the voice of the students. So you have to be reflective on that. Don't use assessment results to beat kids up or beat yourself up. It's just data. That's all it is. What are you going to do about it? Okay. There's no such thing as good data or bad data. The good or the bad comes with, what am I going to do with it? Am I going to use it to change the way I'm teaching, or am I just going to grade it and throw it on their report card? Well, that's the difference between good and bad. Then you're going to apply that. How will I apply what I've learned to enhance student learning, right? So that's where you take that information and you make it good data. So you're going to assess, get that data, and apply it so that you make sure that you can enhance student learning. Hold on, there we go. My slide is not shifting. Come on, here we go. Gosh, everything was working so nice. There we go. So what does brain research tell us about learning? Remember, we talked about the emotions being the gatekeeper to learning, right? What is the role of emotions? They're the gatekeeper to learning. Sensory rich experiences. The more we can connect to different senses with students, the more they're going to lock into long-term memory, the more connections with neurotransmitters. They're looking for patterns all the time. If you can create patterns in the way you teach, if you can show them something that they can count on, they can anticipate what's next, it'll build into long-term memory. The brain development, you have to know about how the brain develops. You have to know, is a certain lesson or certain activity appropriate for the age of a student based on where their brain is developed. So we're going to talk a little bit about constructivist theory. Individuals construct meaning and understanding through prior knowledge. They apply this knowledge to new situations. The constructivist theory really, you see this evident in the different socioeconomic level schools, right? Low socioeconomic schools, students have less experiences in order to connect new situations to. They don't have the prior knowledge or the background knowledge to apply new knowledge to and make those connections. Higher socioeconomic schools, those students sometimes have more privileges, more opportunities. They see the world more. They get out more and do things more, so that they can construct a deeper meaning and understanding by connecting to their background, by connecting to their prior knowledge. Most of the schools in California are there to support students on the lower socioeconomic side. So what do we have to do? Well, we have to equip our students with background knowledge. We have to give them prior knowledge that they can connect to later. We have to be very thoughtful about that. The only way you can give students prior knowledge is by giving it to them, by giving them prior knowledge, by giving them experiences. What are ways you could do that? Well, when you start planning out your year and you start thinking about what kind of connections do you hope your kids end up with, you backward map. What kind of background knowledge do I have to provide my students for them to be successful at the end of the year? Okay. If you just open up a textbook and start teaching, they're not taking into consideration what students know and what students don't know. They don't know your kids. Those curriculum writers are from other places. They don't know your students and what their background knowledge is. You have to be prepared. Okay. Don't wing it as a teacher. You have to plan. Multiple intelligence theory. A lot of you have probably made some sort of connection to this. We identify some students as, hey, that's a really number smart kid. They're just got a math brain, right? Or maybe they're a music smart kid. They're very musical. They understand those patterns. Well, I choose to believe that all of us have different levels of these smarts, quote unquote, within us, right? I totally subscribe to what Carol Dweck talks about in having a growth mindset. If I'm more inclined to be a number smart person, does that automatically mean I'm not a word smart person or a more linguistic person? Absolutely not. Can I grow in my linguistic skills? Can I strengthen those skills? Yes, I can, right? There are some people that might have gifts in certain areas that might give them an advantage, but really it comes down to the hard work that people put into trying to increase their intelligence in these areas. So we talk about diversity, right? When we're thinking about our students and how we differentiate to meet their needs, we have to consider a lot of things. They have to consider their multiple intelligences. We have to consider the different senses. We also have to consider their learning style, cognitive style. Are they auditory learner, visual learner? The answer is yes, they are. They're an auditory learner and a visual learner. Are you telling me if you're a visual learner right now, you're not learning anything in this class? No, you're hearing me. You're learning not as much as you probably could if we were in person. And we also know that through lectures, half of what I say is going to be forgotten before I start my next sentence. And then out of the other half, only 36% is going to be remembered 12 hours from now. So you're only going to lock in and remember, about 14% of what I teach you tonight. We've learned that through research and the lecture and lecturing. It doesn't work, but we try to make this as interactive as possible. So that's kind of a lesson for you when you're standing there and you're the sage on the stage in your classroom. That's why we have to make those connections. We have to tap into the emotions. We have to give students experiences that are sensory rich. We can't just stand up there and talk because they'll forget everything you're saying. We have to consider their emotional, social, and physical development. We're learning so much more about the emotional and social development of our students. We're learning more through MTSS, multi-tiered systems of supports. We're considering the emotional stability of our students, their backgrounds, all those things were taken into consideration. I don't know if you've ever heard of adverse childhood experiences. Those, if you have an ACE score or an adverse childhood experience score of 4 or higher, there's research that suggests you're going to live 10 years less. If it's 6 or higher, even less. I mean, this is affecting kids' lives, and these are all experiences that they experience in the first 3 to 5 years of their lives are going to sometimes doom them, right? But we have to make sure that these students, that we're helping these students cope. We're building them up emotionally and intellectually and physically, right? We have to do a lot more than what happened in school years ago. Consider their gender. Boys and girls do learn differently. Neither one is right or wrong. It's just they learn in different ways because we know that boys and girls develop differently. Sexual orientation is starting to play a role in our schools. Language. Of course, there's language barriers. We have to consider that. Cultural diversity. Students from different cultures have different background experiences. We have to understand our students' culture. Exceptionalities, at-risk students, socioeconomic status. Again, all these things tie into who a student is, and you have to get to know your students. So how do you do this? How do you learn about your students? If you're an elementary school teacher, you could have anywhere from 20 to 35 kids in your classroom. If you're a high school, middle school teacher, you could have anywhere from 120 to 160 contacts in a day. And really, if you want, that's intimidating. I never taught high school myself, but I think about, how important it is to build relationships with students and how much time and energy it took with me as a teacher to build relationships with my 25, 32, or whatever I had in a year. Just how important it is to do it in high school as well. You're going to have to work that much harder in high school to make those connections with all of those kids. How do you get to know your kids? Review their CUME files. I've heard teachers in the past say, I don't look at CUMEs. I want to give them a fresh start. Well, that's a big mistake. If you're the type of person that if you read through a CUME and you're going to start judging a kid for what they've done in their past, well, maybe you shouldn't be teaching. You should take that CUME file. You should take a look at it. There is important information in there that you can get to know about your students before they even walk through your door. Okay? It doesn't matter what their discipline record was. Okay? But you have to read a little deeper. Why did they get in trouble? Who was their teacher? What do you know about that teacher? What do you know about that student's home life? Right? There's reasons that kids act out in class. Okay? But just to say, I'm getting a troublemaker, well, you're passing judgment. You don't want to sit there and say, well, I'm just not going to look because I want to give him a chance. Well, how much of a chance are you giving a kid if he comes in and he's got these adverse childhood experiences that he's dealt with his whole life? He comes from a home that's broken and dad's in jail and all these things. And you're going to say, I'm giving him a fresh start, but then he acts out on day one and you get rid of him. Had you known something about him, you might have had more empathy, right? So you got to make these connections. You got to do the research. Student questionnaires. I love when I see teachers sending home questionnaires in the summer. Get to know your kids before they show up. It's not that hard of a concept to grasp. We get in education, we get a summer. No other job gets that kind of time off, right? And we'd like to use it for vacations, but we should be using that time to prepare for the next group, to reflect on the last group and prepare for the next group. I encourage you to take that time. When I taught, I went and visited every single one of my students during the summer. I got my class list in June, and I went and knocked on the doors, introduced myself to families. I often got invited in. But you know how easy the first day of school was? When they already knew me, when parents already knew me, when I put out that effort, just put a little bit of effort in to go and visit families, to make phone calls to your families, to send personal letters home to your families with questionnaires, whatever it takes. It'll go a long way, and it'll serve you well. Oh, come on. Let's not freeze again. Family questionnaires. Observe and interact with students. Wow, there's a crazy idea. So now how do you apply this information to your classroom? Well, it's variety. Vary the materials you use to teach. Don't just teach from a textbook, right? Switch it up. If you're teaching a unit that's exciting, that might require students to go outside or to use something with their hands, do that. Find other resources. I mean, I taught, I'm dating myself, but the internet wasn't full of as many resources as it is now. Geez Louise, you have Teachers Pay Teachers, Pinterest, all these different websites where you can get so many different ideas that people share. It's amazing. And so use different materials. Just make sure you're not filling it with fluff, that everything you're doing is providing rigorous instruction and keeping students moving towards the standards. Vary the instructional strategies that you use. Different types of strategies is key, right? Don't teach the same way. Don't always lecture. Let's have some group discussions. Let's do Socratic seminar. Let's have some debate. Let's try different things. And then vary the ways in which you assess. Don't just give a written test. I would love to see a student, instead of writing a book report, creating a movie on iMovie. How easy is it with iMovie nowadays, right? I want you to remake To Kill a Mockingbird with you and 3 friends, and I want you to make an iMovie that's no more than 10 minutes and redo chapter 4. You want to see somebody understand. I know there was a Spanish teacher. I love this story. There was a Spanish teacher in the area at a high school that I used to be principal, and his Spanish assessments were videos. The kids had to create videos. Sometimes it was they had to do a cooking show, so they had to actually share a recipe and cook a whole recipe like something you'd see on Food Network, but they had to do it all in Spanish. So one assignment was to make your own novela, right? So your Mexican soap opera. So the kids had to do this, had to all be in Spanish. It was incredible to see what these kids produced. Do you think those students remembered what was taught to them? Absolutely they did. Did the instructor get the assessment results that they wanted? Were they able to see whether or not students were comprehending what they were teaching? You're darn right. If you're teaching a unit on weather, have them give a weather report. Great stuff. All right, so differentiated instruction. You can differentiate 3 things: content, process, and product. So differentiating content, that's the what. Okay, so if you're thinking about teaching, a perfect example, I walked in the 2nd grade classroom today. They were teaching numbers, 3-digit numbers in standard form, expanded form, word form, and base 10, using base 10 blocks. So that's actually differentiation, right? It's taking a 3-digit number and it's showing it in 4 different ways, right? So you want to make connections. Now, maybe I differentiate from my lower students and I don't do a 3-digit number, I stay with 2-digit numbers, right? And I could do the exact same thing. That's differentiating the content. Differentiating the process might be, okay, you know what, whole class instruction isn't working because I've got so many different groups of students in my class that I need to do centers, or I need to do blended learning rotation model, where I'm teaching different lessons to different groups of kids based on what they need, while other students are doing other activities, right? So that's how you would differentiate the process. Differentiating product is differentiating the way that their outcome. What are you expecting students to produce? to show that they've learned something. Well, does it have to be the same for every student? What if you have a student who's musically inclined or loves poetry? Can they write a poem about what they learned? Can they draw a picture if they're artistic? So that's what it means to differentiate the product. Okay, we're a little process check. We're 20 minutes in. How's everybody doing? Am I going too fast?
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. Let's keep going. So you're going to differentiate content, process, or product according to students' readiness, interest, and their learning profile. Is a student ready to learn what you're teaching, right? Next week, my favorite week of this class, I'll be showing you a lesson plan template that really shows how to move from one stage of a lesson to another, and really, you move from stage to stage based upon student readiness to move from stage to stage, okay? Students' interests, you want to differentiate all those three things, content, process, and product, based on interest levels. Are you going to teach things students aren't interested in? Possibly. Do you think if you get to know your kids, find out what they're interested in, and start, adapting the standards to their interest levels, that you might get better results? Absolutely. Think about their learning profile. What have you learned about this student? How have they learned in the past? What do teachers from the past say? What do the parents say? What kind of learner are they? Got to take all this into consideration. So we're going to try something tonight. It looks like we have 28 of you. So we're going to break into 7 groups, and I want you to go to this link. Would somebody please copy and paste it into the chat? Then I'm going to break you out into breakout rooms. And you're going to turn your mics on, and you're going to talk about, the instructions here says, discuss what differentiating content might look like in your classroom and how you might do it. So don't really talk necessarily about the website itself. You're going to look at the website. You're going to use it as some background information. And you're going to discuss what differentiating content in your classroom, your future classroom, or your current classroom might look like. All right, I'm waiting for it to get posted in the chat. Perfect, here we go. Head on into those rooms. Cynthia, Jonathan, Catherine, Kimberly, Paul, and teacher. Who's teacher?
The idea to talk about how we differentiate in our classrooms?
Yeah, I think we were supposed to, is this the one we're supposed to look at? The one that's like, that's the one we're supposed to look at, right? The one that's,
Yeah, I'm looking at the website. I forget what he had us talking about.
Just how you differentiate in your own, how you're going to differentiate content in your own classrooms.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
do we need to reference this? We need to reference this, this link in order to do that?
Not necessarily. It's just some background information for you.
So I guess, well, I guess we can kind of go about whether we're in general ed
or if I have background noise.
No, you're fine.
How are we doing, breakout room 3?
Hi.
Doing good.
Hi.
We're reviewing here and reading the content.
Somehow, when I tried to open the link, it disconnected me from the Zoom, so I have no idea why.
Oh, well, you're back in, so you're good.
Yeah, I'm good.
So what are your thoughts? How are you going to differentiate content?
Well, I would have definitely made sure that my students had taken some kind of learning style inventory, questionnaire before I started, designing the lesson.
Okay.
Okay, I agree. Some sort of like a small assessment or survey to where they're at, so we can start grouping them maybe.
In the ways that they learn best. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, good. You're on the right track.
I think where I'm starting to struggle a little bit is trying to, because basically what I'm looking for is like middle school or high school math, like algebra and geometry. So trying to put together something in my head on how I would really differentiate it. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, every math course, I remember going through a middle school, high school, you had to do an assessment test to even determine if you were even qualified to be in that course. And if not, then you'd be bumped down. So
it's almost with middle school and high school, it's kind of embedded in sections, right? There's math 1, there's math 2, and so they differentiate there. But
I have a daughter in middle school that is going through that process.
Right. Well, even within those sections, you're going to have different styles, different ability levels. They're not. It's not a homogeneous group, and so.
Right.
Yeah. So think about that. I'm going to move to another room. Keep talking.
I guess maybe in that way.
How to present it to the class was always different, which I thought that was very, very important. I think it's very good to have those students in those groups that enhances and strengthens the things that they're good at, and then you start to incorporate things that they're not so that they can't do so well, and you start to work on those things as well.
Good thought, Greg. So what I hear is you're talking a lot about differentiating the process, though. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. So how would you differentiate the content, the what you're teaching?
That is a great question.
So we were saying before you came in that we would assess the students, see where they were, and then gear the lesson to their individual needs.
Perfect. How often are you assessing kids to do that?
So every 2 weeks, once a month, depending on what the subject matter is. If it's more complex subject matter, give them a little bit more time to work on it. If it's simpler, like I was saying with like spelling words, I geared the spelling words specifically to the student instead of just giving the entire class the same spelling words, because everyone's not on the same level.
Nice.
Spelling.
Okay, good. So you're suggesting this, and this is revolutionary. You're suggesting to diagnose. You're suggesting to assess your kids on things they may not know before you start teaching.
Yeah.
Wow. All right, I love it. Good. We'll be talking about that a little bit. Keep going. I'm going to switch rooms.
Okay.
So that's something that I do with at my school.
Yeah. So I would love to scaffold, because I think scaffolding would fix a lot of my reading problems, but I only have about 15 minutes in my day to actually accomplish
Yeah, and then
it.
there's always time. Yeah, that sucks, because you should have other people. With 34 kids, you should have at least one other person, maybe even two, coming in throughout the day, twice a day, to pull a few kids or to push in and support you in class.
Yep. Nope.
Wow.
Kelsey, that's an ideal situation to have that kind of support, but what if the money's not there, right?
I mean, it's not. I'm discussing what really is going on in my school.
So okay, so let's say what then? So I don't have AIDS. What then?
I just got to try my best to make it as interesting as I can for the students to
right. And we're going to
I can move forward.
Yeah, and I'm going to give you guys some strategies. We're going to talk about tonight some strategies on just a little better than trying our best. It'll actually be something you can do, because trying our best is good, but that's kind of like saying hope is a strat. I hope they do well. you know?
I think centers was something that you brought up, Professor, and I think that's a great thing that she might be able to implement.
Yeah, centers, right? So we take that idea of centers, and we're going to talk about blended learning tonight, which is a revolutionary way of utilizing technology to differentiate instruction. And it's happening more and more across the country because what happened back in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s was center-based instruction. What centers was every kid went to every center and did the exact same thing at every center. And then when they got to the small group with the teacher, they got differentiated learning right there. But blended learning, especially the station rotation model, it talks about students getting work at every center at their own individual level. And we're going to talk about that. So I'm going to bring everybody back here in a second. You guys are right on the ball. Good job.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. That was a really interesting. I mean, 34 students, that's a lot.
Hello.
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 You there?
Yes.
All right. I'll wait for everybody to get back.
New stuff so that they don't feel like overwhelmed.
Right. All right, we are back all together. So how did you guys enjoy the breakout classroom? What do you think about that for online teaching and learning? Did that work
It's
for you?
fun. That's
Good.
fun.
I try to use that every term, and I swear this is the best it's ever worked. So we'll try it again in the future since it seemed to work well for us tonight. There were some good discussions going on. I'm sorry I didn't get into every single breakout room. I think I got into just over half. Good discussions. You're right on point. I'm hearing a lot of talk about diagnostic assessment, right? When we think about, I've always compared education to the medical field, right? If you go to a doctor's office and you've got symptoms, hopefully your doctor doesn't say, take 2 of these and call me in the morning. Here's your prescription. Hopefully they run some tests. Let's see what's wrong so that I know how to prescribe the proper treatment to meet your needs. Well, education is the exact same thing. If students just came into your classroom and you said, well, here's what you're going to learn. I'm just going to teach it to you. It's the standards. That's like giving every kid the same pill. Okay. What we want to do is we want to give diagnostic assessments. It's good to give a diagnostic assessment at the beginning of a year of all the grade level standards. How great would it be if by the second week of school, you knew everything that every one of your kids knew and didn't know, right? And then you start creating your scope and sequence, your lessons, your units, and you start planning your year based on that information. You could take the prior year's data and kind of do the same thing, but the Matthew effect shows that there's a lot of loss of knowledge over the summer. So it's good to reassess at the beginning of the year. So I heard that. I heard a lot about, what do I do when I've got 34 kids in a classroom and no support? How do I meet the needs of all the different students in my classroom? So lots of good questions, lots of good discussion, and we're going to attack some of that here tonight. So here's an example of differentiating content. This is called the Frere model, and a lot of you, I'm sure, are familiar with vocabulary instruction. Here you can see a Frere model is a great way to differentiate vocabulary instruction. So you put the term in the middle. This could work in a math class. If you put, exponent in the middle, what's the definition? And it should be in student-friendly language. What are the characteristics of that term? What are some examples? What are some non-examples? I've seen the Frere model include what are some pictures, right? So you can add a lot to this so that you're not just doing, this is the word, here's the definition. which I still see vocabulary taught that way. Here's the word, here's the definition. Go to a foreign language class. My son, who's a junior in high school, his Spanish class, words and definitions. It's like, use the FAIR model. Cut down the word list from 25 to 12 and have the students really interact with what does it mean to nadar, right? So they can really get to know the words and what it means. We're not going to do a breakout because I want to make sure we have time to get to some other things here. Another breakout on differentiating process. I know some of you were talking about that, but we're actually going to do an example of that. And then product, you can take a look at these links on your own time and learn at that same website that talks about process and product. So Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, there's some principles for that, providing multiple means of representation. This is great. You'll see UDL with math instruction, right? We're really starting, if you've read any of Joan Bowler's research out of Stanford University on math instruction and UDL, talking about how students have to have multiple representations of concepts to really have it sink in, especially in mathematics. Providing multiple means of action and expression, provide multiple means of engagement. And there is a UDL video on Blackboard. SIOP, Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol. I want you guys to look up the 8 components to that. Lesson prep, building background, comprehensible input, strategies, interaction, practice application, lesson delivery. These are all on YouTube. Let me see, I can probably click on one of them. There's the link right there, YouTube.
I have a question.
Go for it.
Yeah, so doing the differentiation for the mathematics, is that why my daughter who's in 2nd grade comes home learning all these very strange ways to do different math problems?
Yeah, the Common Core standards have taken the idea of UDL and put it into practice. It's hard for our generation that didn't learn that way. We learned, we didn't learn anything abstract. We learned everything concretely when it came to math. So what we're doing now is we've learned through the research that we learn better. It sinks in better. Kids may have a deeper understanding of math concepts when we teach the abstract first. What they learn actually carries through high school, and that's the ultimate goal, is that they learn more complex math in the future.
It's hard for me to get my head around it
because we haven't practiced it.
It's like, okay, math is math. There's only one right answer to a problem.
There is only one right answer, you're right, but there are multiple ways to get there. And that's what we're trying to teach.
Well, she's definitely teaching me a lot, that's for sure.
Good. But that's exactly right. The Common Core Standards has embraced the Universal Design for Learning research, and that's what you're seeing. And it's frustrated a lot of parents, and that's the one thing you're going to learn in education is everybody knows how to teach because everybody's been in school. Nobody questions a stockbroker or a lawyer or a doctor when they do something, but everybody questions teachers because everybody thinks they know everything about our job. Our job is as complex, as difficult to understand as rocket science, as brain surgery, as any of those things. Teaching a child to read is one of the most complex things in the world you can do. One of the most important. And I would even venture to say that most K2 teachers don't truly understand how to teach literacy. If you're going to teach K2, make sure you take the extra classes. Make sure you pursue maybe even a master's degree in literacy and reading and become a specialist in how to do that. That's how important. We have a moral imperative, folks. I'm kind of soapboxing here for a second, but the work we do is more important than any other job in this world, right? We are tasked with educating the next generation. We talk about poverty. We talk about social issues. We talk about all these things that's wrong with our world. If you want to fix those things, it starts in school. It starts in school. We have to start teaching our kids how to be good citizens, how to think for themselves, how to keep their opinions to themselves unless somebody asks for it, how to back up their opinions with facts, how to fact check other people's opinions. We have to teach these things or else you're going to end up in the mess we're currently in right now. So SIOP, I want you to take a look at that on your time. It's definitely something you should get to know, the 8 components of Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol. It says it's a model for English learners, but anything that's good for English learners is good for all kids. Because guess what? We're all learning English. We all are. Doesn't matter what grade you're in. Doesn't matter what your first language was. We're all learning it. I mean, why are we still teaching 12th grade English, right? So it's for English learners, which is all of us. All right, blended learning. I want to talk to you a little bit about blended learning because I want to talk to you about how to differentiate process. Okay, this is a hard thing. And if you want to look up, and I'll type her name right here, after class, of course, not right now. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about tonight, some of you who are going down the high school route might think, oh, that sounds more elementary. But Catlin Tucker is a high school English teacher in, I think, Sonoma County, who uses blended learning. She's actually written a number of books on blended learning, but she uses it in her high school English class. And it's a fabulous way of taking the technology we have today and integrating it so that it raises achievement. I did a research project on this about 6 years ago. On ways, how does technology raise student achievement was the question that I posed. And the answer to that question was no, it doesn't. So we're spending millions and millions of dollars to make sure every kid gets a computer. But technology in itself does not raise achievement. You have to look at technology integration. There's research from Dr. Ruben Puentedura that talks about the SAMR model, S-A-M-R, which means, are we using technology to substitute? Are we using it to augment, modify, or redefine? And then there's research out of the Scope Center for Learning at Stanford University, led by Linda Darling-Hammond, who's now the current State Board of Education president, but she's a Stanford researcher in education. And so they discovered that, yes, technology in itself doesn't raise achievement, but when integrated properly through blended learning, actually does raise student achievement. And the answer to why it does is because it's differentiation. So if you think about the traditional way of teaching where all kids come in, you teach to the middle, and then at the end of the lesson, if you have 15 minutes, maybe there's 6 or 7 kids who didn't get it, so you meet with them. And then those kids who already knew how to do it before you even started teaching, you give them extra homework. Okay, that's what's happening in so many schools. What you do is you take blended learning and you find a personalized learning platform, which there's tons of them out there. It could be Summit, it could be MobyMax, it could be Acellus. There's all these different software companies that have created personalized learning platforms. Some of them are expensive, some of them are very inexpensive, and many of them are really, really good. And so what you do is you've assessed your kids. You know where each one is when it comes to specific objectives. So if I'm teaching, like, let's bring that second grade example that I talked about earlier, which is 3-digit numbers using base 10 blocks or expanded notation or writing it with words. I know what my students know and I know what they don't know. So I have the blue group. They're going to meet with me for 15, 20 minutes, and I'm going to differentiate content and process with them. Small group, they're right in front of me, so they can't make mistakes because I won't let them. And the red group is out at their desks with their computers, and they're online doing a self-paced personalized learning software. So it could be a high group of students that are working way far ahead of 3-digit work, or it could be some of my lower kids working in 2 digits or just their fact families. But the computer software itself determines exactly what they need to be working on and the pace which they're working. And then I might have another rotation where students are doing some sort of project-based learning activity where they're working together and they're learning how to apply what they're learning in groups. So I'm differentiating the product. And so this instead of having this math block that's an hour and a half, and I teach for 45 minutes of it, and then I run around trying to put out all the fires of kids who get it and don't get it, now I have an hour and a half block where I've got these 20 to 30 minute rotations moving around beautifully in my classroom. And every single second of that student's day now has been consumed with rigor. They're learning and they're engaged in something that applies directly to them and what they need. So that's a background. That's blended learning in a nutshell, but we're going to watch a quick video.
There's no audio in this video.
Perfect. Thank you for letting me know soon enough. Let me see if I can rectify that.
There is. It's just very, very quiet.
Let's try it now.
Perfect.
All right, round one.
This rotation is taking place in a grade 4-5 math class in order to support blended learning.
We take the best facets of a face-to-face classroom with a teacher and the children, and we take the best facets of an online environment and digital tools and kind of merge them together.
There are 4 stations. At the Math with Technology Hub, students are using a virtual geoboard to solve a problem and then explain how the app helped them on an online discussion board. Assignments like this have made math this student's favorite subject.
I like doing math because there's more to math that we do on this. And we usually only use the textbook, and it was kind of boring, so this is a lot of fun.
She submits her work at the end of the rotation on a virtual learning environment, or VLE, that gives her teacher instant access to what she's completed.
So I will be able to go on tonight and look and just quickly scan and see how many people A, completed it and understood it, and B, how many will need more support. So it's almost like a yes, they have it, or no, they don't have it, and that will influence my grouping and teaching for the next day.
Then there's the Math with Myself station that has students completing problems individually, and the Math with Miss Dale station.
So what would the area be then? 88? Yeah. How many agree? Thumbs up if you agree, thumbs down. Well, let's do the math. So for that 10 to 15 minutes, I have their full attention, their full engagement, and that's the most important time for them to acquire the new concept and and that's also the most important time for me to assess what they know, what they don't know, so that I can base, future lessons on that too.
The final station has students working with a partner. That way students can feed off each other, which is helpful because
you have a buddy that maybe knows a bit more than you, or you know a bit more than your buddy that you're working with.
Seeing this kind of collaboration is one of the goals from the Huron-Perth Catholic District School Board's Innovation Project. They're using a virtual learning environment to implement blended learning practices, which supports critical thinking and communication in math class. Rachel Skillen is a grade 9 math teacher who's also taking part in the project. She finds students are more engaged and confident when they're working together.
If it's a teacher-led lesson, there might be pockets of students that are not understanding, but they don't feel comfortable enough to, ask questions or to really express that they're not understanding. But when they're working together and collaborating, then they feel like they're kind of in it together, and they feel more sense of teamwork and that they are working toward a goal together. And so I think all of those things help.
The students also appreciate the time to talk things out with their peers in small groups.
The teacher explains it in more of a teacher way, it's more professional when your friends kind of know what you struggle in and stuff, so they can explain specific parts to you.
And hearing that explanation process can give the educator some insight.
And if you minus 9.5 from that, that'd be the y-intercept. Yeah, but do we need the y-intercept?
So I go around and I listen in on their conversations that they're having, and then they have much more opportunity to ask questions of me, and we have that sort of dialogue or that conversation going back and forth, so I get a much better sense of sort of what their thinking is and where their level of understanding is, and then it gives me an opportunity to give feedback to them throughout the lessons.
In this lesson, students have to watch a video that's posted on their news feed in the VLE and then solve a problem that asks them to find a missing variable.
We got the assignment and then we went into groups, which is good because group work and math go really well together.
Students can use whatever resources they want in order to get their answer.
The classroom is transformed where there are no walls, and kids have access to all of those learning materials and each other in a way where the students' ideas and the students' thinking really becomes the content of the learning.
At the end of the class, they present their answers and explain their reasoning. Just before they leave, they also answer one question on the VLE to help the educator gauge what the students took away from the lesson.
So it gives me that instant feedback, and it gives them the instant feedback as well to know that they understood what they were supposed to be learning or they met the learning goals.
And when students leave the class, the VLE allows them to access resources when they need it and encourages further collaboration.
Our world now is all technology, and it helps us because when we're at home studying for a test, all the stuff is on the internet, so we can go and look at it, and we're interacting with more people in our classroom.
It also helps teachers collaborate.
Teachers love going into other teachers' classroom to look for ideas. So the idea that you can, do that in an online environment without having to leave your own school or your own home, it's an incredibly rich resource for teachers.
But it's not just about using new technology or resources. It's about coming up with a pedagogical approach to meet the diverse needs of all students.
We used to come at it where we would just say, here's a great piece of technology, everybody use it because it's awesome. And now I think we're coming at it from an aspect where if we give them the reason why we want to use these tools, then we can really achieve true blended learning and accomplish those pedagogical goals.
The Innovation Project used a blended learning format in order to provide professional development for the teachers taking part. The plan is to make use of the work submitted this year.
I think that's going to really deepen our understanding of thinking in mathematics and how we can help students make thinking more visible.
All right. Thoughts? Go for it, Kevin.
Yeah, I've actually used Samer at my school site, and I'm actually the on-site tech support for the smart boards, the different generations of computers that come out for teachers. And I gotta be honest, when it connects with language-based learning, the technology and the touchscreen applications and the interaction it's immense. I mean, I can't even comprehend it sometimes.
Nice. So you're the Samer guru on your campus, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I work with all the technology, but really it comes down to the students and the video really based on the future of our technological wave as a society. And I'm trying to build my students up for a world that I will not be a part of.
Right. And so, yeah, this video does talk about it. It's funny you say it's the future, but that video I think is like 9 years old, 10 years old. I mean, this is going on. This is a movement that's happening, and we got to get on board because compare blended learning. Think about being in that classroom as a student. Think about the different levels of students in your classroom. Think about how much more engaging school would have been had you gotten content delivered to you at your level all day. Any other thoughts?
I think it's perfect because I also want to become a math teacher, and it's showing that this technology and the groups that they set up in was for math. And it's very difficult for a lot of students to grasp the concepts that teachers teach in math, but the fact that they break them off in groups where, okay, group A is going to meet with the teacher for 15 minutes and we're going to work together, and then group B, you're working by yourself for 15 minutes and to see where you're at, and then group C, you're going to work with a partner, and that partner, like the kid said, could be either further along than you or actually behind you. You got to help them out. So I think that the fact that they're using the classroom setting as a group setting to bounce ideas or bounce thoughts and help each other grow, I think that's what's going to benefit them in long run.
Absolutely. I want to caution you, there's no perfect solution. It is a better solution than what's been going on. And it really does embrace the idea of 21st century learning, right? When you think about the 4 C's of 21st century learning, which is creativity, collaboration, communication, and what's the fourth one? Oh, am I slipping on me? Anybody? For extra points. I'm just kidding. Creativity, communication, collaboration, communication. Yeah, I think, okay. Anyway, there's 4 C's out there, and it's getting late, and it was a long day. I had 2 IEPs today. So, all right. So differentiated learning blended learning can differentiate content, process, product, all the things, all differentiation could happen in that format. So let's play a little game. We're going to take a look at some data. This is reading data from an entire class, let's just say, even though it's a whole grade level. You don't have a ton of data here, but you can see that I've got students who, let me see here. I've got a student here, if you could see that, who is, if this line is grade level, I've got a student who's, probably reading at a 10th grade level. Then I have a student down here reading at a 1st grade level, and this is a grade 5 classroom. How am I going to differentiate? Perhaps Kevin sees, he knows what Renaissance looks like, right? How am I going to differentiate my instruction based on this data? Okay, differentiating instruction based on data. Thoughts? Kelsey, thank you. Critical thinking, which I'm not doing a very good job of tonight. What are some ideas? Take something you learned tonight. How are you going to differentiate your process based on this information? Bueller? Yeah, so Cyril, you have reviewing the fundamentals with that low group. Okay. Good. Anybody else? They're going to need some really intensive support down here. Okay. Can I group them together? Looks like many of them. Maybe I can group this group of students. This kiddo here is going to need some one-on-one. These ones might be grouped. Small groups with the teacher. Again, yeah. What are you going to do with this kid? On all these students. Because you can't forget about Susie over here. She's crushing it. She's a reader. Okay. We want to think, and we're going to talk about student-centered learning in a couple weeks. We're going to talk about project-based learning and getting them to really think more critically as opposed to giving harder stuff. Because you think about it, do you want to penalize Susie because she's a good reader? We don't want to give her more homework, right? We want to get her thinking harder. We want to get her to go deeper. We'll talk about Webb's depth of knowledge too. Bloom's taxonomy, all those things where we talk about going up and down in complexity. Good. So you're getting the picture there now. Good. All right, I gotta stop annotating here. All right. Oh man, all that stayed on my screen. It's the first time I've ever drawn on my screen here. There we go. All right, we're going to go to Kahoot.it. Your attendance question for tonight is this. What three things, how are 3 ways you can differentiate? How are 3 ways you can differentiate? And you could email those 3 ways to me for credit tonight. Go to Kahoot.it, and we're going to do a quick little Kahoot and have a little fun here before we go. Let me get you on. Here we go. The game number is 87669. Love this kid. All right. Only 19 tonight. Here we go. 20, 19. All right, we're getting started. Here we go. Are you ready? 7 questions tonight. Number 1, what does PSYOP stand for? PSYOP. Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol. Here we go, Amber in the lead. Here we go, next question. Which 3 areas should teachers differentiate? It is content, process, and product. Next question. What are some effective ways to learn about your students? Good. Everything but Facebook is correct. Next question. What was one model we discussed for differentiating content? Yes, the FRAIR model. We did not discuss the BORBA model tonight. We're saving that for another time. Next question. What is the most common form of differentiation? It is differentiating content. The content is the most common form, but we're moving towards process being more common. Ooh, that separated some folks. Here we go. Is this Kahoot quiz an example of differentiation of content, process, or product? It is process. It is process. It's the way that I'm assessing. So it's not the product. Some of you might think that, but it's the way that I'm doing something. The process of assessment is being done differently. Here we go. Last question. Blended learning is different from centers because blended learning focuses on what? Focuses on a specific skill or standard. Very good, very good. The winner tonight, JML 890 Watson Factory comes in second, and Mickey rounding it out third. Excellent job, everybody. We're gonna shut that off there, and I'm gonna pull up my last slide as we look at assignments. Discussion board, citations, thoughtful responses, PSYOP, UDL, differentiated instruction as journal topic, your RTI case study, make sure you're reading. And week 3, look ahead, we're going to be talking about direct instruction, teacher-centered instruction. We're going to look at the learning pyramid, CCS. We're going to break apart Common Core standards into teachable objectives. We're going to talk about TAPL, which is active engagement, and a little bit about Common Core standards, but not too much. Next week is one of my favorite weeks to teach. It's good information. You're not going to want to miss it. What would you like to know about the RTI case study, Roxanne? I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and you are welcome to leave if you're good to go.